In this video, I'm going to show you guys how to go from having a single light in the middle of the room to having recessed lights. So let's go ahead and get started on this project. Look at this disaster. We're going to be replacing this false ceiling, which was very poorly constructed, and also fixing a bunch of code violations which are happening right above us. Now my guess is that the power is coming out of that socket right there in the middle of the room. Those are splices outside of a junction box, and that is completely against code. And then down here, there is another splice outside of a box. We've got some old abandoned wires over here, which are still hooked up, and then they ran a switch leg down over here, and there is a light switch right down here. All this ceiling is going to be coming down tomorrow. You can see it's dark outside. I'm filming after work hours here so that we can get some footage of this before it all gets ripped out tomorrow. We got the ceiling opened up in all the different spots where we're going to be adding boxes. Probably the most important thing is how you're going to space and place each recessed light. A good guideline to go by is to take the square footage of the room and divide it by 25, which in this case the room is 15 feet by 10 feet. So it's 150 square feet divided by 25 gives us 6 recessed lights, which is exactly what we have decided to place in here. Now that we know how many recessed lights we want, we have to decide where we're gonna place them and how we're gonna space them apart from each other. A good safe bet is to place them 3 feet from the wall on either side. So your corner lights are gonna be 3 feet out and 3 feet out from each wall. That's gonna be a really comfortable placement. Closer to the wall, you might end up highlighting imperfections that exist in the wall. However, the closer you get to the corner, the brighter that top corner is, and it makes the room feel a little bit bigger. So I am not afraid to put them a little bit closer to the wall in certain situations. You're gonna have to base this a little bit on your ceilings. We have joist cavities running this direction, and then they have these furring boards that they're gonna be anchoring the drywall to. We had to kind of work with that, so we ended up being 33 inches out to the center from either side. Finally, we can talk about the distance in between to like your middle lights. All we did in this case is divide the space in half, and what we ended up with is about a 5-foot spacing. And that leads me to one other rule of thumb that I've heard, and that is to take the height of the room and divide it in half, and that's kind of a good spacing for your recessed lights. This ceiling in here is a little bit over 8 feet, which means that spacing in between each recessed light would be about 4 feet or a little over 4 feet. And there's also a lot of different types of recessed lights. So there's some that like kind of stick out a little bit. Those are gonna send light off sideways a lot more. Or if it's truly recessed and it's kind of up in the ceiling a little bit, that's gonna have more of like a spotlight effect. What you wanna think about is how are the cones of light gonna overlap on the floor? So those would be my basic suggestions on placement of where you're gonna install each one of your recessed lights. The other development is that the wiring situation was even worse than I had originally anticipated. You can see right up in here, this is an example of knob and tube wiring that is still in use. You can see those white glass pieces that go through the wood carrying the hot and the neutral separately. And then over here on this side, they come out of the joist that ultimately lead to our final fixture. So we'll have to consider all the options we have for an alternate power source. Hopefully we can pull from like a receptacle like that one down there on the wall. Definitely gonna have to just leave this knob and tube in a junction box right here because I believe it's being used for other parts of the house. The power is now off, so we're gonna go ahead and disconnect our wires here. Now we'll just pull our wires into our box. High quality electrical tape is worth the investment if you want it to actually like stay on for a long period of time. All right, there we go. We'll just bend these over now. For now, that's all we have to do for terminating our old knob and tube wiring. I might actually pull a new cable up into this box, some Romex, so that we have the option of using this as a center light in the room as well. This roll of Romex was like $170. This one was like $120. Or something like that. This stuff is really expensive right now. If you haven't already, take a second and hit that subscribe button right underneath this video. I'd really appreciate it. So we're going to replace this original junction box with a standard nail-on box since we do have the wall opened up. If you didn't want to open up the wall, you could use one of these remodel boxes. When you tighten this down, these little ears come out and will hold the box in place and kind of clamp up against the drywall. Now we're going to be installing a single gang box here and be putting our receptacle in this location. And then we're going to install the separate box over here on this side. That's going to be for our 2 switches. We're going to have one switch for the recessed lights and one switch for the center light in this room. If you look on the side of most boxes, it'll actually have little indicators built in that are set for the depth of 1/2 inch drywall. So if we just set this lip here up against the edge of our 2x4, it will give us the proper depth. This is a little bit angled the way this is set, so I'm actually going to hold it out a tiny bit more. And you can actually take a level or something similar if you have an existing wall surface and set that across like this to give you a more precise set point. If you want to, you can add additional support right here. For a triple gang box, I might consider putting additional support here just to make sure that that stays in place, but this is pretty substantial the way it is. The other thing that you should pay attention to with a double gang or a triple gang box is that however level this is or is not, is how it's going to stay. You can't really tweak the plate in a way that makes it look straight if the box is crooked. With a single gang box, if it's slightly askew, you can use the receptacle to kind of level it up, and then the plate screws to the receptacle. Either way, you want to put them in straight, but you have more forgiveness with the single gang boxes. Yeah, what are the chances of that? Before we pull any wires into these boxes, we're actually going to start with our recessed lights up on the ceiling and pull the wire between those. I like to generally work backwards, pull the wire furthest away in the circuit first, and then work your way back ultimately to where the actual connection to the house wiring or to your panel is going to be made. If no wires are hooked up to the power source, there's no way for it to accidentally get energized. So we'll go ahead and start pulling wire between our recessed lights. I will link to all the different tools and accessories that you will need for this project in the description. I take a lot of time to go through and detail out all of the different things that you're going to be needing. Not really sure why I'm holding my Nipex, but I'll link to all the electrical accessories, all of the boxes and lights and trim kits, everything that is involved. I'll try to do my best to link it in an orderly way in the description. So we're ready to roll out some Romex, and we're gonna just leave it in this bag that it comes in, or the shrink wrap. And then you just pull cable from the inside of it. Don't pull it out and have it just coiled up like this. Just take a minute and just kind of unroll it. Kind of give it a little bit of a twist as you're pulling it out. And then go like this. And now we're ready to pull this through. All of the runs that we're doing today are pretty short, so working with a short piece of cable is not that big of a deal. Compared to if you're going to be pulling a really long run, you might want to consider buying one of those Romex unrolling devices. We're going to leave ourselves about 6 inches past the face of the box. I usually just use kind of the handles of my wire stripper as a guide. So we're just going to clip that off about here, and then we will strip that sheathing back after the fact. And then we just need to make sure that we anchor our cable within 12 inches of a box with an integrated clamp. If the box did not have a clamp, it's within 8 inches of the box. And then we'll just continue to staple the cable in place as needed. All of our Romex has been pulled to our recessed lights as well as our center light right up here in the middle of the room. All you have to do for recessed lights is run the wire from one to the next, to the next, and to the next. It's called daisy chaining. The way it's set up in here right now is this is set up in a horseshoe shape. This is an end right here, so there's just a single light being powered. The wire comes in, there's no other wires going out. And then if we go this direction, it comes across the ceiling up above there, and it goes into that recessed light, and then that one down there. From that end can right there, it goes to that corner, and then it comes across the ceiling, and finally makes its way over to our last recessed light. We've chosen the corner can right over there. You can see there's 3 cables hanging down right there that need to be installed, and that third cable is the power that will be feeding these lights. That wire goes over into the wall and comes down into our switch box, which is on the right hand side right there. We do have one more wire coming from this location right here that comes up and across the ceiling and goes to our center box so that we have the option of hanging kind of a dining room light. So let's go ahead and get started daisy chaining these lights together. When you install new recessed lights, you usually can wire them from this side right here. And there's a little tab that we just push up right above it. Our cover pops off. That reveals our little wiring box here. Now these things come with these push style connectors. Most guys will go ahead and use them. Some people really are paranoid about them. I am fine with them and I'm going to use them today. The one thing you have to watch for is sometimes these things won't always be pushed on all the way. They'll just be like partially pushed on, and so you want to make sure that each conductor is fully pushed into these connectors. And you can see, since they're clear, whether or not it is pushed in all the way. Usually what I do is I pull my cables into the box, and then once I have the length I want, that's when I'll actually staple the cable up here in the joist cavity. We want to make sure that we have at least 6 inches coming in our box here, and I just use the length of my wire stripper. A lot of times this is actually a little bit longer than 6 inches, so we've got plenty there. If you had a larger box, the code minimum is that you have 3 inches past the face of the box. So if it's like a larger box, you need to take it to the opposite corner, kitty corner, and make sure that you have at least 3 inches past that. You don't want so much that you're having to like cram it in there really bad, but having a little bit of extra definitely isn't a bad thing. All right, we'll take our second cable, pull that through so we have about the same length on each of them. So at this point we could go ahead and staple it behind here. Oh, you know what? I haven't finished anchoring this box in place. There's one back here too. There we go. Now it's not going to move. Now I'm going to take my utility knife and very carefully score down the center of each one of our cables. By scoring down the center, it's going to make sure that you don't actually nick the insulation on the hot or the neutral. You're just going to be running it down where that bare ground wire is located, so it's not going to damage anything. Just like that. Now we can split the cable. You want to leave at least a 1/4 inch of sheathing showing after it comes through the connector, but I typically leave closer to a 1/2 inch. Now we can take and strip back each one of our conductors. Approximately 1/2 inch is all we're going to need. In this case it's 14 gauge solid. Now I like to start with my ground wires, and then after the ground wires are done we do the neutrals and then the hots. So we'll just get our ground wire ready to go, and we'll go ahead and push those in with our existing connector that's already here. So now we have 1, 2, 3 ready to go for our daisy chain, and we'll just tuck this back into the box. Now we'll take our neutral wires and our connector and push them in one at a time, making sure that they are fully seated. Alright, and finally we can hook up our hot wires. And same thing, just tuck all those neatly into the box. If this was a dead end, all you'd have to do is just put the single set of wires connected with the fixture wires and you're good to go. The one box that's going to be a little bit different is our box that has our power coming into it, where we're going to have a total of 3 cables coming in. So we're going to have to do that a little differently, so I'll go ahead and video that one for you guys so you can see what's going on with that. I didn't realize this for quite a long time, but if you take the screws out of the inside of this can, this will actually drop down and allow you to have access to this junction box, because you cannot have a junction box that is not accessible. These junction boxes look like they're inaccessible because once you drywall it, it seems like you can't really access it. If I go like this, you'll see that plate pops off just the same as it did from the other side, which gives us access to our conductors if we ever needed to make any repairs. You can stack 2 cables under 1 staple, so that's typically what I like to do. Don't overdrive the staple, just drive it in far enough that you can't easily move the wire back and forth. It looks like I need to hit this one more time here. All of our connections are completed with this fixture now. All we have to do is come back and put our LED trim in here once the drywall is complete. Now we've caused ourselves a little bit of difficulty. If I had brought my power in here, I could have just used the existing connectors that come with the recessed light. But since we're coming into the middle of the run of our recessed lights, we have 3 cables instead of just 2 that we have to connect to this can right over here. So let's go ahead and do this can here, because this is going to show you the rest of what you would need to know where you're bringing the power into the middle of your daisy chain. A lot of times you can twist these and then they'll come off. Oh, this one's actually not pushed in very far at all, kind of like I was telling you guys. Yeah, there we go. So I'm going to just exchange these for some 4-conductor Wagos. These are walnuts, they're called. I'm good with these push connectors. They make everything a little bit quicker. Alright, let's get our cables pulled in here. There we go. Alright, we'll go ahead and get our cables stripped back. Real quick, if you guys appreciate this content and you want to support the channel, just go ahead and subscribe to the channel. About 90% of the people that watch the channel don't subscribe because they just needed that one thing or whatever, and I appreciate everybody who watches, but if you want to see more of this content, subscribe and turn on notifications. Alright, let's get back to the project. Alright, and as before, we're going to deal with our ground wires first. I think we might actually just roll all of them back into the box at the same time. I'm going to take my gloves off too. I feel like the black gloves make it hard to see what's happening a little bit. Alright, we'll do our neutrals next. And finally the hots. Alright, there we go. Drop our cover back on. Oh look, there's some guy standing on the top step of his ladder. Wait, is this the top step? This like upper part right here? Or is it the one that I'm standing on? It just says don't stand on that one. And don't sit on it. All of our recessed lights have been tied together in one daisy chain, with this corner recessed light over here being the one that actually connects to our switch. So that comes over down the wall. So we've worked ourselves back to this location right here. You can see I've marked my wires. Right here is cans. Right down here, this is for our center light. And those are gonna be coming into this switch box right over here. We're just gonna have 2 light switches. This first one closest to the opening I think will be the center light, and this one will be for the recessed lights. Now we have to get power, and so we're going to be moving this old receptacle, all these wires, into our new box right here. In order to do that properly, we needed a bigger box. So our power is turned off to this circuit right here. I actually discovered something kind of interesting. I found that this is actually being powered by the wrong sized breaker. This is 14 gauge wire coming to this receptacle. This entire circuit is being powered by a 20 amp circuit. So 14 gauge on a 20 amp circuit is definitely hazardous and something that you want to avoid. So we're going to be updating that breaker to a 15 amp breaker compatible with the wiring that it's attached to. For a minute I was second guessing myself and concerned that maybe this was 12 gauge wire. Romex wasn't always color coded like it is now, so now 12 gauge wire is yellow, 10 gauge is orange, 14 gauge is white. So when you see white Romex, you instinctively think, oh, that's going to be 14 gauge. But it wasn't all that long ago that all different gauges of wire were the same color. Everything was white. So you have to make sure you visually confirm that you do indeed have 14, 12, or 10 gauge wires on the conductors themselves if you're dealing with older wiring. So let's pull the wires out of this box. We'll move them over into this one right here. We'll get our switch legs pulled into this box, and then we're going to put a jumper across from here because we're going to be pulling power from this box over into our new wiring. So this is kind of interesting. They used a crimp connection for the ground wires. It's a very nice and solid connection. I haven't done much with them, but I've read in comments that people really appreciate these and the added benefits that they can have. So I'd be curious to hear your reasons why everyone else should also be doing so. But maybe I'll make a video on that at some point in time. For now though, I think we're going to trim this back to where the wire wasn't quite so twisted up. Right there. When you strip wire, you can really easily tell what gauge it is. I'm pretty sure this is 14 gauge wire, so if we go to the 14 gauge solid, if this were 12 gauge, it would want to drag really bad. but as you can see, it didn't drag at all. There's like a tiny bit of play in the 14 gauge. If we go to 12 gauge, it's a pretty massive amount of space. So this is definitely 14 gauge wire. I think we're gonna use Wagos for all of our connections today. I know that there's a variance in opinion on whether or not Wagos are superior or inferior to wire nuts, but sometimes it's kind of fun to just feature them. Since we used them on the lights, or they came with the lights, we're just gonna continue and use Wagos for everything. So we're just gonna get ourselves a little chunk of wire here for getting power from this box. All right. All right, we're ready to tie all of our wires together over here. This one down on the bottom is our power, and that just comes from right over here. So this is our power that's gonna be feeding from our old box over into our new box over here. So we'll start by just stripping back each set of wires. Now we're just gonna get all of our wires trimmed out to about the same length coming out of the box. We're gonna start by tying our grounds together, so we'll just keep those in the center. Now we're gonna use Wagos, like I said, so in this case, these are Wago walnuts. All we have to do is push these on. These don't even require us to clamp it down. It's automatic. So we'll push that one in, this one in. Feel free to share your opinion in the comment section. Do you think that Wagos are the best thing ever, or the worst thing ever, or somewhere in between? With lighting circuits like this, you're not putting massive loads on these wires. And even in those higher load situations, personally, I would be fine. I kind of forgot we needed 2 grounding pigtails, 1 for each switch. So we're gonna have to take this off. All we have to do is grab a hold of this and just rotate it back and forth and twist it while pulling. And that should come off then. So we got those ones off, and this one as well. Now we can use our 6 conductor Wago instead of our 4 conductor. And then we're just gonna loop our pigtail like this. Now we can roll this back into the box. And then these are our pigtails for our 2 switches. All right, now we'll move on to our neutrals. If we want to, we can add a neutral pigtail. I'm actually not gonna do that. A big reason why I would sometimes add a neutral pigtail is so that it's ready to go if you installed like a Wi-Fi switch or a smart switch or something like that. But the cool thing is, since we're using Wagos, it would be really easy to insert a pigtail later on, should you want to do so. We'll still have 1 extra space. If we want to add one later, we'll just poke it into that extra spot. These are our wires going to our center light and our canned lights. So those don't get spliced or anything yet. Those will actually attach directly to the switches once we're ready to do so. And this wire down here is our power feeding the box. We need to be able to attach this to both switches. So what we need to do is create basically 2 pigtails in order to make that happen. Power coming in, power going out to one switch, power going out to the next switch. So that's actually pretty much it, because we know that these are our power going out to our respective lighting, and then these are our power coming into each switch. So what I like to do now is take our ground wire and just kind of loosely wrap it around each set so that I know when I come back to put my switches in, which one is which. In this box, everything is so simple that you almost don't even need to worry about it. And then we'll just carefully fold these back into the box and keep them as far back in there as possible so that hopefully Joe doesn't get them with the roto zip. Just like so. All right, we're to the last box. We'll start with our grounds. Sadly, one of our grounds is a little bit shorter. Our wire's coming in the bottom of the box here. So we have to do a little bit more monkeying around to make those connect. Start rolling our wires into the box. Once we get back to that point, we'll add our shorty on there. There we go. And there's our pigtail for our receptacle. Moving on to the neutrals, going in order. 1, 2, 3. Start rolling. Add number 4. That's another benefit of using the Wago is I was able to connect my 3 normal length ones and then push it in onto my final one that was just a little bit short. All right, we are on to the final connection of our hot leg here. Here's our pigtail. 1, 2, 3. There it is. These wires are prepped now and ready to connect to our receptacle. I am just going to safe these off. That way I can turn the circuit back on again. So we'll insulate our current carrying conductors, which is our hot and our neutral. Wrap our ground wire around like that, and then we'll fold this back into the box like we were with the other side. We're actually going to do the same thing over here as well. We're basically going to simulate the switch being turned on. When the switch is turned on, these wires are connected. When the switch is turned off, they are disconnected. That's going to simulate that our switch is turned on, energize the circuit, and make sure that nothing trips and we don't have any issues with all of those recessed lights that we worked on. Now I'm just going to strip the sheathing off of this right here and safe these off the same way we just did with the outlets. All right, that completes the rough-in portion of this project. We're going to go down to the basement and turn that breaker on. So if there were any really terrible like shorts or anything, it would trip the breaker. So let's go do that. We're going to skip past the drywalling and everything that's got to happen between now and when we can actually come back and finish everything. So I'll see you guys in about a week when we come back here to finish putting all of the devices in and the light trim kits and all of that. All right, let's go take a look at that breaker downstairs. All right, it's this breaker right here. As you can see, this is a 20 amp breaker. It should be a 15 amp, so that's one of the things we're going to be correcting and putting a 15 amp breaker in here like it should be. So we'll go ahead and turn this on. And it didn't trip, so that means we don't have any dead shorts at least. But for now, I'm just going to leave that off. We'll get a 15 amp breaker and get that installed in here to protect the wiring, unlike it has been for who knows how long. We're going to go ahead and throw in this new 15 amp breaker, and this is kind of the minimum that we really should do. We could put an arc fault breaker, and actually I might still come back and do that later, but for now we're at least going to get a 15 amp breaker in, which is going to significantly improve the safety of the wiring for this particular circuit. If we wanted to add an AFCI breaker where it has a pigtail coming off of it, that would improve the safety even further, and that's one idea for you guys out there that want to improve your existing electrical installation. If you go through and take all of the circuits that would normally be required to be AFCI and update all of them in an old panel to be AFCI, that's going to help basically each breaker monitor the circuits for any improper wiring. You'll probably encounter some circuits that will not even turn on once you put the AFCI breakers in because of shared neutrals or other weird stuff going on, but at least you'll know what's going on that way, and then you can target and fix the circuits that need to be repaired. But anyway, side note there, but if you're interested in that, I'll link to the different AFCI or arc fault breakers in the description of this video for you guys to check out. I'll try to put a few different ones for different panel manufacturers. So right here, this is the breaker that we are working with, and you can see there are 2 wires placed on the screw of that breaker. Technically, on the side of the breaker, it actually allows you to put 2 conductors. How many times a lot of inspectors won't allow you to? You can see right there, it gives us the sizes of the wire that can be put on, 14 to 8 gauge, aluminum or copper. And it shows us both 1 and 2 conductors being connected to the terminal. In the case of 2 conductors, it looks like they only allow us to put up to 10 gauge. And then you can see right there our torque setting is also 36 pound-inches or inch-pounds. So we will be setting our torque screwdriver to that setting. So I'm going to be reconnecting those 2 wires to this breaker, even though that is not optimal. The other thing you could do, like if you had a situation where you needed 2 wires to go to the same breaker, you can tie them together in the gutter space and then bring a single conductor into your breaker if you prefer to do it that way. We're going to leave it the same because that's how it was, and it's not technically a code violation. But what do you guys think? Comment down below, is that okay? It kind of looks to me that they are 12 gauge, so based on what's inside of the panel here, you wouldn't have necessarily known that there was a problem. It was further in the circuit somewhere where they decided to basically convert from 12 gauge to 14 gauge. We'll go ahead and turn off our main, and there's really no loads turned on the property right now, I know that, but a few different people had mentioned in a previous video that it's a good idea to turn off these individual loads one at a time and then turn off your main, and that reduces the arcing inside of your main breaker. But I'm not really concerned about that right now, so we're just going to go ahead and turn it off. All right, we're gonna go ahead and turn this breaker off. It doesn't really matter, I guess, but go ahead and pop it out this way and then pull the breaker straight towards us, like that. And now we can disconnect our conductors that are attached to the breaker. Do you think it's time for a new insulated screwdriver yet? I'm just kind of becoming loyal to this one. So we got our 20 amp breaker out. We'll be throwing a 15 amp in here. But before we put the 15 amp in, let's look at the size of that wire. All right, here's our wire stripper. And I usually just use that as kind of an indicator. You can tell what size wire is just based on looking at it if you've been doing it for a while. But if it's fairly new, or sometimes you just like aren't totally sure, you can use the wire stripper to kind of see if it's the correct gauge or not. If we close it on our AWG solid, see by my thumb right here, it says AWG solid or gauge solid. If it's stranded wire, it's actually a little bit larger just because the strands have a little bit of space in between them. So our solid side over here, if we put it in the 12 gauge right there, and we close it, we can pull it off freely. We can insert it and pull it back and forth and it's fine. On the 14 gauge, I'm just going to do it towards the end. It's going to be really sticky. It doesn't want to, like if I squeeze down on it, it actually will make a mark on the end of the wire. So in this case, we know that that one's a 12 gauge and this one, that's 12, that's 14, and it does not move. So this is both 12 gauge wires, and inside the panel, it looks like they do go directly out into the building wiring. All right, we'll take our new 15 amp breaker. And I'm just gonna go ahead and get this tightened down. I'll do the same thing I did in that other video, and I'm gonna tighten this down until I think it's tight enough, and then we'll take the torque screwdriver and see if I was correct or not. You also don't wanna over torque the connection, which is tricky. So, I mean, you can obviously always over tighten a connection, and some guys think that that's totally fine, but actually you can damage the conductors by over torquing. Probably slightly over torqued is better than slightly under torqued, but either way. I'm gonna snap this in here actually, and then we will finish torquing it here in just a minute. For those of you who haven't yet seen it, this is my torque screwdriver made by Wiha, or Wiha. And I will link this in the description. This is a really expensive one. There are some good alternatives, including some torque screwdrivers that are designed for like gunsmithing and things like that. So I will link those in the description. This one's about $200. These are the components included, and I actually had to make a custom bit because it doesn't come with the bits with the particular one that I bought. A lot of the kits do come with the bits though, so in the description I'll link to one that comes with the proper 6mm hex bits. But I had to take a 1/4 inch and grind it down so that it would actually fit into this adapter here. Right here on this end, you can see it's set to 10 inch-pounds currently. We've got it set to 36 inch-pounds. I believe you're supposed to set it back to the minimum setting, which is what I did when I was finished using it last time. That's why it's back at 10 again. So now 10, 12, let's crank it down until we get to 36. 32, 34, 36 inch-pounds. So that's what this second screwdriver is for. Oh, gross. Now we take this part and put that into the screwdriver. We have our screwdriver set to our 36 inch-pounds. Let's go ahead and see if our terminal was already 236 or if it actually has to tweak a little bit more. Wow. So I would have significantly under-torqued this. All right, so that one's snapped. So we got our new breaker in. I'll put our panel cover on and then I'll turn on the power after that. So we'll see you guys later in the project when we get the drywall all completed and ready to go. So you can see the drywall has all been installed. It's in the process of being mudded and taped. I think it's approaching the sanding stage of the project actually. But it's looking really good. It's gonna be a huge update from what it was before. One thing to mention, I guess, is making sure that you have these protective things up in the cans. That keeps mud and whatever texture, paint, everything from getting sprayed up into there. And then for boxes like this, in this case it's not going to be as much of an issue because there's not a lot of spraying being done. What some guys will do is take a little bit of fiberglass insulation, stuff it in there, and then that keeps your wires and everything clean. Something to think about if you're going to be doing a house and they're going to be spraying everything, then I'd recommend shoving a little bit of fiberglass in there to keep your wires and boxes neat and tidy. So we'll see you guys in a few more days when we're able to come and put our actual recessed lights in, our center light, and then finish up our boxes. The drywall has been completed, the walls have been painted, the ceiling is painted, and everything is ready to go now. We can come back and install our switches and our LED recessed trim kits. So that's what we're gonna do. I had to turn the power back on because we're pulling power from a circuit that already exists in the house. So there are other receptacles and lights that were on the same circuit. So I turned everything back on while everything was being finished up, and now we'll go turn it off. We are ready to install that receptacle and those switches, so we're going to go ahead and just turn our breaker off so that we aren't taking any unnecessary risk. It's always a good idea to make sure that the power is actually off, so I like to take a non-contact electrical tester. I'll link one of these in the description. But just go to a circuit that you know is turned on and make sure that it is sensing it. And then go over to the circuits that you're going to be working on and just verify that they are off. Now that we've got the power turned off, we are good to go. Let's go ahead and start by putting in our receptacle and our 2 switches. And then when we're done putting those in, we'll go ahead and install our LED recessed trim kits, as well as the chandelier that goes here in the middle of the room. All right, let's move in and get this receptacle and these switches installed. I got a light set up, so hopefully you guys will be able to see real nice and clear. We're gonna be putting a standard receptacle in this box right here. And then over here, we've got our 2 switches. We'll pull our wires back out of our box. And we'll take our insulators off, our wire nuts. We're going to be using this standard receptacle. You need to pay attention to the options you have for connecting your conductors to the receptacle. Most are going to have this kind of standard option where you can either wrap the wire around the screw in a clockwise direction, or you can backstab it, where you basically push the wire straight into the back of the receptacle. Now there is another type where basically the screw actually clamps down onto the wire, so like you can still insert the wire into the back of the receptacle, but then when you tighten the screw, that actually clamps down on the wire. This is not that type. This is a spring type connector where you push it in there and there's a little spring that makes the connection. So generally speaking, if you use the actual screw terminals, it's likely going to be a more solid connection. We're going to be wrapping it around the screw today, but I'd be curious to see what you guys think. So we'll strip our wires back now. We need to strip about 3/4 of an inch so that we have enough conductor exposed to be able to wrap it around that screw. The orientation that you install your receptacle in isn't an issue of code, but there are some reasons why you might want to consider installing them like this, which a lot of people would just call upside down. If you look closely, you can actually see that the printing or the text on the device is printed such that it makes it look like this is the orientation that you should put it in, and the instructions that come with it also are printed such that the receptacle is ground up. The reason you might want to consider putting it in this orientation is that if your plug starts to come out of the receptacle, the first prong that's going to be exposed is the grounding prong instead of the hot or neutral. When it's in this orientation, this hot prong is going to be a lot more accessible than it would have been if it were in this orientation. All that being said, I'm still going to put it in this way because that's how all of the rest of them are in this particular house. And I think it looks goofy to put one in upside down if everything else is already, installed in this orientation. For indoor applications, you need to be using tamper-resistant receptacles in almost every case. And that basically has a little shutter that has to be pushed to the side by inserting both prongs at the same time. If I take something and try to poke it in here, there's actually a little plastic shutter that keeps me from getting anything in there. I think if it's above like 6.5 feet, it technically doesn't have to be tamper resistant, but just get tamper resistant and you'll be good to go. You can see right here, it's marked TR, which is what represents that tamper resistant. If you're installing a receptacle outside, it also needs to be stamped WR, which is for weather resistant. The gold terminal is our hot terminal, so we're going to be taking our black wire, which is hot, and attaching that to here, and then our neutral right here to our silver screw, and then our ground to our green screw. We'll go ahead and bend our loops. And I'm bending them in the direction that I will be tightening my screws. There's no torque setting information printed on any of the packaging or on the device itself in this case, so I'm pretty comfortable in getting these good and snug by hand without using a torque screwdriver. Now we can take our receptacle and push it back into the box. If you push it in like this first, You can see how I'm kind of shifted it over a little bit so that it can go past where it needs to thread in. That allows the wires to kind of seat properly without using the screws to like push everything in there. Watch your bare ground wire. On this side, I'm gonna just fold that down a little bit more so it doesn't come into contact with the neutral, or the hot side for that matter. I just learned something absolutely crazy. I've been threading the screws into my devices just by hand or with a drill for a long time. And I just realized that some of the boxes have a really, really cool feature that I've been wasting a tremendous amount of time because I didn't know that it existed. Let me just show you on this receptacle right here. Now it's these great boxes that are made by Carlon, I believe is the brand. And in each one of the spots where you install your screws to hold your device in place, there's a little spring in there that allows you to do something pretty cool. So instead of having to slowly thread this into place, all we have to do is push. Ready? There it went. You just push it in, and it ratchets into place. So cool. And then we obviously have to tighten it up the rest of the way once we get it to that point. But in any case, that's a huge time saver to be able to just push those in like that. Now that we got our receptacle done, we can move on to our switches. Now we're just going to be putting in standard single pole switches, but if you wanted to, you could add dimmers or motion sensors or all sorts of different things. Here are our standard snap switches we're going to be installing. You can see we've got 2 gold terminals over here and then a grounding terminal, and that's it. So the neutral does not connect to a switch unless you have a switch that requires a neutral that has a need for power itself, like a motion sensor switch or a Wi-Fi switch will require a neutral wire. We're not going to be using our backstab connections, but rather we'll just use the terminals on the side. Make sure you install the switch so that it's in the correct orientation, so when it's down, it's off. Unless you like to do it the other way. As you saw me do a minute ago, there are these little holes on your electrical stripper that you can use for bending those loops. It's really handy. We're going to be bending the loops up, just like this, because our hot conductors are on this side of the receptacle. So we're going clockwise with the direction of the screw. And for our ground conductor, it's the opposite. I'll go ahead and get my ground connection done here. You can see how sometimes when you tighten it down, it actually will pull the loop tighter. There's that one. I should also note that it doesn't matter which wire goes on which thing. So for example, this wire is actually the one that goes out to our recessed lights. So it actually kind of makes sense if you put the wire going out to your lights or your load on the top, and then the power coming into your switch on the bottom. But functionally, it doesn't actually matter which one goes where for a single pole switch like this. For a 3-way switch, however, you've got to pay attention to what goes where for sure. All right, get these positioned. And then we can just take and push these into place. Super slick. And generally I like to just push all of my devices in a multi-gang box over to one side so that my plate fits a little bit easier. If you wanted to, you could wrap tape around the device to cover these hot terminals here. I usually don't do it unless I was gonna have to leave the cover off for during construction or something, then I'll wrap it up real good. Otherwise, I don't really feel the need to do it, but if you want to, you certainly can wrap the device with electrical tape. We've got our switches and receptacles ready to go. Let's move on to our recessed lights. You can see we've already got a couple of them installed, one right over there and one right over there. There's a million different kinds of LED trims that you can put in, or you can go with standard incandescent. If you're going to do incandescent, you buy the trim kit separately and then you put your incandescent bulb in. And believe it or not, there are still some compelling reasons why you might want to consider incandescent. Incandescent light has like a perfect Cree rating, or basically the true representation of color is best with a regular incandescent. They have LEDs that are pretty close close, and they're getting better as time goes on, but they're definitely not going to be as good as standard incandescent. This one says that it shows colors true and natural with a 90+ Cree rating, which is pretty fantastic, so you can get pretty close with LEDs. These LED trims have a true recessed look. There is no way to emulate this look with the physical light being higher in the ceiling than the level of the ceiling than having a true recessed light. And that's one of the arguments or reasons to put in a true can or a recessed light, is so that you can have a true recessed look. You can get these super low profile wafer lights that kind of look like it's a recessed light, but it's just not. If you want it to look truly recessed, you have to buy recessed fixtures. These particular lights are 3000 Kelvin, so it's going to be a nice warm color temperature. That's usually my recommendation. 3000 K is my personal favorite, and it feels the most similar to the original incandescent. This light uses 10 watts, puts out 650 lumens, and should last over 30,000 hours potentially, although I've had LED lights fail a lot sooner than that. So comment down below, how long do LED lights typically last in your opinion? It seems like sometimes they just randomly will fail. You can see we still have our template / protective piece of paper in here. This keeps all that mud, paint, texture, everything like that out of the fixture as much as possible. You can see this already came loose, but this is usually clipped up in the top of the fixture. You just have to squeeze these 2 tabs right here, and then that allows it to release from the top of the recessed light. Now we simply thread our adapter into the socket, and then we can take our adapter and plug that into our LED trim. On either side of the trim kit, we've got these little spring-loaded arms, and we just have to push those together and then insert them into these little brackets inside of the recessed can. And we'll do that on both sides while holding our socket adapter up above. Once you get it to this point, all we have to do is push this up. Those arms will fold out, and then what I like to do is kind of tap it. Some little chunks of mud that are holding it down a little bit. There we go. I've got one more recessed light to put in over there. All right, all our recessed lights are installed. Now let's move to our center spot right there. We're gonna put our chandelier back in position. We'll pull our conductors out into the side. Here's our fixture. You know what'd be really nice is a drill for this part. Anyone that makes drills want to sponsor the channel? Now before I finish tightening that into position, let's go ahead and make our electrical connections. Now since we haven't used any wire nuts on the job, let's go ahead and use them here just so they don't feel too left out. We'll start by hooking up our ground connection. All right, ground is connected. Now the neutral and the hot. The thing that you have to remember when you're working with these lamp cords is that one of the wires will be smooth and one of them will be ribbed, or it'll have some like little markings in it. But this one has ribs in it, and this one over here is smooth. Smooth is always hot. So we're gonna take our one that has our ribs on it and connect it to our neutral. Give it a tug and make sure it's nice and secure. Now we'll take our conductor with the smooth insulation and connect that to our hot conductor. Give it a tug, make sure it's good to go. Now we can go ahead and roll these up into the box. And we do have a connection made to this top plate right here. Our ground wire goes onto this plate before going down inside of this chain to the fixture. Now we'll go ahead and finish tightening our fixture into place. I should have brought my drill. My goodness. Now we simply take our trim, push that up, take our lock nut, and that threads right underneath that trim to hold it in place. There we go. All right, well, what do you say? Let's go turn the power on and see if this stuff actually works. So this should be our center dining light. Hey, look at that. And then this second switch should be our recessed lights. There we go. All of them lit up. You always have that moment when you flip them on, you're like, oh man, I hope I did everything right. Hey Thor.
Yeah.
You want to come see it?
Yeah. Are you videotaping me?
Yes. What do you think? That's the same as before, right?
No, it's different. It's higher.
Oh yeah, it's higher because it had to be.
Whoa. That's a lot of light.
Yeah, isn't that nice?
That's nice. It really changes the whole feel of the room.
So now you just gotta move all your stuff back in. It should be great.
Yay! That's what we're doing today.
I hope you guys found that to be a useful video. This video took a ton of work to both film everything as well as edit everything. For every minute of video you see, typically it's about an hour of editing. So a lot of work goes into it, even though it seems like it flows pretty well when you're watching it. So I'd really appreciate it if you guys chip in a little bit. There'll be links in the description. If you choose to buy anything through one of those affiliate links, a very small percentage of your purchase will go to support the channel at no additional cost to you. I'd really appreciate it if you hit that thumbs up button, subscribe down below for more videos just like this one. All right, I'm gonna put a couple videos here on the screen for you guys to choose from if you guys want to keep learning with me. In the meantime, take care, stay safe, and I hope your project goes absolutely fantastic.